Welcome everyone. Today we have with us Srikanth Velamakani, who's the co-founder of Fractal Analytics. Welcome, Srikanth.
Thank you, Sunil.
Yeah. So I think I'll just jump straight to the questions. I obviously, like right now, the only thing 2020, the only thing that has taken mind share is the COVID-19 crisis. But one good thing about technology is technology always looks for solutions, and it always looks how to make things better. So in that respect, what would you say are the artificial intelligence and data analytic tools that are being used to help fight the crisis and help us cope with this challenge?
Sunil rightly said, absolutely. That's the good thing about technology is that we're always trying to find solutions to problems. And this thing began on, I remember the Fractal leadership team was in London on February 25th and 26th. When Donald Trump was in India, we were in London doing a AI conference. And there were a bunch of questions on how will the COVID crisis explode and what should we do and so on. And literally the day after that, we just concluded that this crisis is very severe and we put travel restrictions like a bunch of other companies. I came back to India. I wrote to a few people that I knew in the local administration and state administration, etc., across the country, and told them that you may need some AI support and happy to extend that. Soon enough, I got a call from the Mumbai's municipal commissioner, Mr. Praveen Pardeshi, and he said we need help. And then I got together a few other people, and then we started serving the Mumbai team. The first thing we did was, how do we track and trace all the people who are coming into Mumbai, would all come in the last few days of February and early days of March, and see where are they, what are they doing, and is there any of them has symptoms? How do we track and trace them, and they trace their contacts? That was the first step. The next step became and by the way, you can use a lot of analytics and data sources to do that. So it went off, it started there. And the next step was, we need to find out in Mumbai at a ward level, at a zone level, what is going on, because Mumbai is a large city, 20 million people, right? 6 million people take the train every day. It's a complex, big city. So what we were trying to do was, how do we see the spread of the disease at a zone level, at a ward level? So we know what is the next hotspot, emerging hotspot. We use mathematical models to do that, AI models to do that. And here the innovation that we had to bring in was that to get that granular and get of data, we had to start looking at that granular level data. And we had to do a real-time transmission indicator, RT, instead of R. Typically in models of epidemiology, you use R, which is the rate of transmission of the disease. RT is a real-time rate, right? That's what we started to do. And soon then it became about hospital capacity and so on. So there was a whole host of things that we did around managing the pandemic, which is around using AI to do that. The second one was around diagnostics. People wanted to know, how can I diagnose this through not just from the test, but other ways, right? As you may have seen, there is a test that's been developed that can actually, you can cough into a phone, and it will sort of listen to your cough and figure out if you have COVID. And that's become recently been developed. In the early days, what we started doing was to use X-rays. It's a chest X-ray. Can you use a chest X-ray, and can you look at the consolidation in the lungs? Because COVID frequently comes with bilateral opacities in the lung. Now that we know, not just those are COVID cases, but they will be severe COVID cases. So we started using that in Mumbai and in other places around the world to first make the admission decisions. If you have a test positive or not, if you have the chest X-ray, and use both of them together to make whether somebody should be admitted or not, and how serious will the case be. In Italy, for example, this is an algorithm developed by Cure.ai. It's CE approved, and in Italy, hospitals in Lombardy started to use the algorithm to not just to diagnose, but to actually monitor progression. So they would take a daily X-ray, say yesterday's X-ray and today's X-ray, and see what is the differential of the two. Is the consolidation increasing? Because where it is increasing, we know that these patients are likely to deteriorate, may get into an ICU, may not make it, and it helped them in planning the ICU capacity. So that was another. So it was all AI. So what Cure had initially built was an AI algorithm to detect 29 different abnormalities in a chest X-ray. COVID was added as a last one, right? Because that we didn't know COVID didn't exist. But when COVID came in, we had to look for COVID. So that is that. And if you look at vaccination, there's a lot of work that's happening around figuring out what's the right vaccine, that develop the vaccine. And many of these are accelerated for the first time ever in the history of technology, in history of pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, that this has become so quick, right? And also because they are using several machine learning and AI techniques to actually reduce the cycle time of these kinds of findings. That's happening. In one case, for example, to manage, it's a public health disaster. So one of the things that we also started doing piloting was seeing if we can send drones to various parts of the city and actually from the camera feeds, figure out where is social distancing happening or not happening, right? So that we were trying to do. And even the cameras, think of all the closed circuit CCTV cameras that are there across the cities of Mumbai and other cities. Can you see that feed and based on that figure out which are the places where social distance compliance is low and therefore the spread may be higher, and can we stop that from happening? So if you think about all these steps, it's there. AI is being used. And finally, I just want to mention that when the vaccination actually arrives, the vaccine arrives, we have to get 1.3 billion people on our planet, get 2 doses, means 2.6 billion doses effectively, safely, and make them come to the clinic or wherever that is being administered and take those vaccines, right? It's a very big process. And again, data, technology, AI, even behavioral sciences will be very important in making sure that everybody takes those vaccines. So AI is playing an important role across the entire life of this pandemic.
Yeah. So thank you for that overview. In fact, a couple of questions I was asking was related to that. So like one, we find that AI, like Silicon Valley, even India, we are masters at data analytics and AI. So two, two sectors or industries which were behind were government and the healthcare industry. Like another problem with the healthcare industry is there is a lot of data privacy issues. So, if you want to compare. So like going forward, do you think like governments will be better equipped to using AI data analytics? That's part one. And what changes do you see in the healthcare system and hospitals? Because what you have talked, it happened just with COVID. Will it going forward also, will it become a permanent issue? And what else can we expect?
I think it is fair to say that whatever we learn from this pandemic, we will get better, and we will we use those learnings for future, right? We'll hopefully possibly overcorrect for it, right? In the last big pandemic of this kind happened in 1918, and that was and now we have 100 years later, we have a very, very big pandemic. So while people like Bill Gates have been saying that this is just a matter of time, pandemics will happen, we were not really ready as the world, and we didn't have. But now that we have learned some of the new learnings that we have developed, I mean, for example, vaccination. The vaccination cycles will have to become shorter because people have figured out that if you put the right energy and effort into it and make the right bring right AI, you will bring that down, right? You can bring the cycle down. It is about, let's say, wearing masks. It so happens that 100 years ago, wearing masks it went through the same cycle. It became a political statement and all of that stuff, and eventually people started wearing it. Hopefully next time when it happens, or if it happens, we will not make those same mistakes. We'll learn from the previous mistakes and sort of adapt it. It's been 100 years, so we've forgotten some of the lessons. But hopefully this time around, whatever learnings we get will fundamentally change how pharmaceutical companies develop drugs, how vaccines are developed, how public health is taken seriously, and what are the public health, the technology infrastructure, technology backbone for public health is created. All these things I think are going to be very different in this time around.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying. Like 100 years back, we were caught off guard, and even now we were caught off guard. But the difference now is the adoption of technology. Like say, for example, we have facial recognition, we have data which is digitized. So is it possible, say for example, if all airports and train stations have the facial recognition technology, will they be able to detect that suddenly people are coughing and sneezing more if there is a spike? So I mean, now is it possible that to look at the data and actually see a pandemic coming, to actually see that it is geographically in this area? Do you
Yes.
think we have reached that stage, and how will that pan out?
Absolutely. It is, in fact, even for this pandemic and for COVID-19, right? I think there were a few people who had seen, like late December, they started picking out these trends, and there were a few people who had written about it, that there could be a pandemic on the way, or there's some funny disease that's spreading, right? Or there's some funny disease that has some weird characteristics, right? Because people after SARS and MERS and then H1N1. I mean, generally speaking, public health officials have been thinking that something like this would come. So they were using sporadic information in various websites and other places and culling the data and alerting that something seems to be wrong, right? We need to investigate that. That happened. But of course, it was not that cameras were there everywhere and they were detecting this. So your point about having CCTV footage everywhere in the world and then sort of tracking it in some way, learning that these are the abnormal or unusual things that are happening right now is definitely a good one. I just want to sort of also say that because of the face recognition, I mean, especially if it's face recognition, it's a bit difficult topic because it also creates big brother situations which are very, very dangerous. So as long as it's responsible and the AI that we build is responsible and we have the right ways to safeguard it from going to the wrong hands, even the government. I mean, got wrong hands doesn't mean it's some bad actors, right? Even people supposedly with good intentions can sometimes use it for purposes that seem nefarious at the end. So having very strong guardrails against face recognition and so on would be important. But I do think that the technology is developed, and now with so many cameras across the world, we should be able to detect that. Now, what's happening is that all these cameras are collecting all the feeds, but not that much intelligence is being generated out of it, because they're all disparate, etc. So there are still issues of, okay, how do you store all this data? Can we mine all this data? People are discarding those data sets. So that level of thinking hasn't come through, but it is definitely a possibility, and hopefully some of the bigger cities, etc., or some of the more progressive ones will probably figure it out before the others.
So that's what, when it comes to data, what about the data privacy and security? I mean, is India doing enough? I think Europe is again upgrading. They're coming with a new regime in the summer of 2021. So do you think we are still understanding it, or now we have got the hang of it? This is what we have to do to secure our data.
Again, having worked with the Indian government on a few projects, I can tell you that it is taken very seriously by everyone, because people know that we have a very vigilant and it's a critical media environment, right? It will be picked up by the media for sure. So, I mean, that's media doing its job. Honestly, that's a good thing. Plus, there's a heightened awareness that these are sensitive topics, and intentions are good across the board, right? What we may lack is infrastructure, right? So some of these things require very good infrastructure. I mean, just telling you, like, initially during the first few weeks of the pandemic, do you think that everybody could have managed the privacy of every patient while they were exchanging this data? Not at all. People were using WhatsApp groups. People were sending files on email or various kinds on WhatsApp and other kinds of things, right? So it was not a perfect example, but it was also a wartime situation. It was the fog of war, and people had to do what they wanted to do, and their intentions were good. But the infrastructure, a secure infrastructure, which automatically protects for privacy and doesn't need for people to do the right thing. But the system already sort of has safeguards and guardrails in place. That kind of system doesn't exist yet in India. So the intentions are good. The government and the bureaucracy wants the right things, and they're all also not just want the right thing. They're also scared of not doing the right thing, because that's also not okay. But the infrastructure is not yet there fully, and I think this is an opportunity for India to build the infrastructure further from where we are.
Okay. So, and we talked of government, healthcare. There's one other sector where big data and analytics is big, is the retail e-commerce. Like in America, I think it doubled in the last 1 year. So there also, I mean, it's not just a question of supply demand, it goes up. They are also in the future, they're looking, like you mentioned, drones, driverless vehicles. So, I mean, the e-commerce is going to be a huge ecosystem of drones, driverless cars, delivery boys, and, go down. So how have they been using big data analytics and AI? And going forward, what does that world look like?
Look, I think as far as retail is concerned, it is fundamentally changing, both from an e-commerce standpoint, right? People are finding different ways to buy, and certainly the idea of going to a store that has come down even further. I mean, anyway, it was happening, that change was happening, and now people have very few incentives to go to a store. They're everything, the convenience, value, quality, everything is assured, and plus, plus it's doorstep delivery, right? So it all really adds to a lot of value. But even in the retail sector, people are saying, okay, if you have e-commerce doing a bulk of the many kinds of, satisfying different kinds of needs in retail, how should retail be reimagined in the light of e-commerce? So what are those things a retailer can do that an e-commerce finds hard to do? For example, if I want to if I want to touch and feel products, if I want to get a super experience, right? I mean, the retail stores have to be redesigned in a way. So Amazon has actually tried that. They have concept stores in the United States, which are all about, these are much smaller stores. It's not a Barnes and Noble bookstore, like lots and lots of books, but these are, when you go to a store, you are possibly looking for bestsellers, right? You're probably not there just to laze around for hours and hours. Maybe there are some like that. So you have to have an eclectic collection. It's the entire selection is not as big as a big box store, but you have bestsellers and you have a few interesting hobbies where you can lose yourself, right? So, and you can have a touch and feel experience. Maybe you want to talk to authors. How should a bookstore be reimagined in the world of e-commerce? I think that's a question. And if that's the case, same is true for grocery stores, same is true for department stores. I think we'll just have to think, e-commerce is not a threat. E-commerce is not a competitor. E-commerce will be the default way in which people buy products. Then with that already happening, how should retail, traditional retail be reimagined? One of the things that Amazon also has done is Amazon Go, for example. You can walk into a store, you can get the reviews, you can get a personalized feel, and no checkout experience because you can just walk out and it'll charge you to your credit card. Those kinds of experiences are becoming common. Korea has tried a very interesting model where people spend a lot of time in commuting. So on railway stations, they've created a virtual store. So it's big screens on big walls. You can just quickly order and products come to your home. So it really says, how do I enter your life in a very effective way, right? Where you are, meet the consumer where she is or he is, and then serve them to the best of your capability, right? That way, if you think about as the future of retail, I think there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of interesting developments to happen. And many of these involve a lot of AI and big data, etc.
So like another thing, like you're in the data business now, the common person doesn't even realize what kind of a data explosion has taken place. So for example, today we have millions of data centers. We have billions of devices which access them. So the journey is like crazy. Then another aspect is IoT devices, which will be collecting and transmitting data. Already there are more IoT devices than there are people. And I read one report which says you'll have 500 billion in 2030. Then even if you talk of sensors, like one company boasted all our products have trillions of sensors. So I mean, when I was growing up, you could not even imagine this trillions. So what I'm saying is, are we equipped to handle this data explosion? Are the analytic tools, are the AI, are we able to keep up? And I can't imagine what it'll be like after 10 years. The data will be exponentially greater. I think we can't even imagine it.
Yes, I agree. The data explosion is huge. I think even as in 2014 itself, it happened that machines to machine communication was already bigger than human to human communication, right? That happened in 2014, 6 years back. And obviously data explosion has continued to happen. And like you rightly said, IoT devices and so on. So we will have enormous amounts of data. And the good news there is that storage has become very, very cheap. You don't have to really discard anything. Processing has become much, much cheaper with cloud and other technologies that are available. So really, it's no longer a question of whether do we have the infrastructure, do we have the processing capacity, etc. Those are all there. I think the limitations will be human limitations, right? Can we really understand all this data? Can we really process all this information that is available to us? Do we have all the problem statements defined? What are we looking for? I think, like, to refer to your previous example, you said, let's use all the cameras in the world to detect a next pandemic. Right? That problem hasn't been posed that way, right? If once it is, somebody comes up with this problem statement, can machine learning do it? Yes, it can do it. But has the question been asked? Probably not. And so it will be human imagination, which will be sort of taken to the next level, and which will be tested in some ways, rather than just the processing capacity and the storage capacity. Having said that, I'll also say that there are some very interesting algorithms. For example, anomaly detection algorithms. Right? When you have IoT devices, you want to predict what parts will fail, what equipment will fail. This, there's a lot of data that tells you how the machines around the world are doing, devices around the world are doing. So to do that, I mean, human beings can't just look at all the data. So we have to have better and better anomaly detection algorithms, which say that, look, I see this, this product is heating up a little bit, and this is unusual. It heats up, but not in these situations. And therefore, I think that this may fail, that you may want to trigger that. So we need better and better algorithms to sift through the data and tell you what you need to know, not just what you want to know, right? So that's where I think, again, the whole areas of unsupervised learning, which is getting a lot of interest these days, is because it says, okay, all this massive data, just keep looking at it and tell me what is interesting. And it's a very interesting way to ask that problem. But that's where I think a lot of good progress is happening, apart from the supervised learning, which is like, take all the data and tell me these are cats, these are dogs, and find out which is a cat, which is a dog. That's a little easier today. The unsupervised learning and the reinforcement learning, which is about how can I get better and better every day by taking some actions, learning from those actions. Those are the areas where there's a lot of development happening. So yes, from a technique standpoint, more evolution will happen, but this the infrastructure enabling systems to handle that level of data and process that data. That's, I think, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all these people have just figured it out already, and they've made it available to all kinds of startups. That you can be a tiny startup, but you have access to the cloud. You can run your own big data shop. You can analyze trillions of points of data. So that's become easy.
Okay. So one more thing I was saying is like India is like becoming a $3 trillion economy. We talk of us becoming 5 trillion, 10 trillion, but now incrementally it's going to be tough unless we adopt deep technology, unless we master data, unless that layer is only going to take us to the next. What do you think India is lacking? What do you think the government can do to enable technology for us to grow both technology and economy?
I think, we've had big gaps over the years, right? If you look at 20, 30 years, we would have gaps like there wasn't enough entrepreneurship in this space. Then you would have issues like there is not enough capital. And then there was issue of we don't have enough demand, right? There's nobody who wants to buy it, right? There's not enough knowledge, or there's not enough access to market in other countries, selling it to other countries and so on. So you can look at, you can see that systematically, each of these challenges have been resolved, right? The last of those challenges are about capital and the cultural aspects of startups, how startups can succeed. And you can see that even there, a lot of progress happening. There are a number of companies that have become so successful in the last 3-4 years. Great examples of companies becoming unicorns. India is producing a bunch of unicorns, right? You may not believe that all of them are worthy of being called unicorns, and you may think some of it is hype. And I would agree with you. But having said that, still you can see that there's tremendous progress happening. And it is creating a culture where people are saying, look, I can change the world. That confidence that I can really pick a problem and I can be better than any other country in the world, right? This is China, this is United States, UK, Australia, whatever, I can beat everyone, right? That level of confidence and the capital to back that confidence, risk capital, genuine risk capital, I think is beginning to happen, right? Earlier there was risk capital, but VCs would say, okay, if you're doing an online store like Amazon already is, there is no Amazon in India back in 2007. So let me fund a company called Flipkart, right? And so on, right? So it was all about copycat capitalism, right? It's like, you look at some other model, some other country, just copy it. There was no genuine new things in India. But now that's changed. Now people have seen that India can build its own software as a service businesses and really conquer the world and even conquer India. So you see that kind of capitalism, which also understands how to invest and how to evaluate SaaS businesses and invest in them. So I think last of those barriers is gone. I see the next 10 years, you'll see many more extraordinarily successful companies come out of India and really start to change things. So what the government can do is to just encourage, make it easy, make it, take out, from a regulation standpoint, make it extremely easy to invest in India and Indian companies and invest in ideas and make it easy to fail. Make it easy for companies to start and to fail quickly. And don't go after them. And I think there are some steps being taken. There's a lot can be done in making investment easy, making entrepreneurship easy, making startup capital easy, and making failure easy. That's where I think India can do a lot of work. And if you think, the second thing I would say is that the AI opportunity in India is vast. It's really huge. So one of the things I propose is that India should make 5 introductory AI courses free for every citizen. Right? Just teach every single person in India 5 basic AI courses. You will see the benefits of that play in, as dividend in the next many years. Right? I mean, get the greatest professors in the world, create those courses, develop an e-learning module, and just administer those courses, make everyone, certify everyone on AI. And 5-10 years from now, you will see that India has really changed the world, because we have all the other things. We have big problems, we have big data sets, we have everything else going on. So that's the second thing I would do to help us build the talent level in India as well.
So, and anyway, like what you said is they should be allowed to fail, because even in Silicon Valley, if 10 companies fail, you have one game changer. If 100 companies fail, you have one world changer. So I think that failure is very important. We have to embrace and then move on. So anyway, so based on that, like I'll probably ask one last question. Like COVID-19 crisis in 2020 has been a time of shock, a time of learning, a time of change for all of us. So for you and Fractal Analytics, what have been your biggest learnings, and what have been the biggest insights you got this year? And maybe if what advice would you like to give to corporations based on that?
I think it has been a huge learning experience, without a doubt. I think every crisis is a test of leadership, in my opinion. Right? Because world needs leaders all the time, but leaders are most required in times of crisis, because we need clarity and we need direction, we need optimism, right, from a leader. Right? I think providing that at a time of crisis is important. And like they say, crisis doesn't change the values that you espouse. It reveals what your true values are. Right? So how do you behave in a crisis tells you what kind of a leader you will be. Good times leadership is one thing, bad times leadership is another thing. So then that is I think the big lesson for me during this COVID crisis is that, can you put people first when things are looking a little bit shaky, right? Because that's the longer term better strategy. I think that we have really, it's been really a game changer for us. And that's how we have shown a lot of growth in the pandemic. Right? I mean, when the pandemic started, we didn't know, like anybody else, we thought maybe our business will shrink. It has grown substantially. And we could have made some really stupid moves around people. We didn't, right? We gave them a lot of assurance, a lot of clarity that we are here and we will not do anything crazy, stupid, and we will just be there for you, right? And that really worked out. The second thing is that COVID-19 has created digital acceleration like nothing else. Right? It is really meant that it has really tested the boundaries of what is digitally possible, and it has been mandated almost. Like we have to do all these, you have to reinvent yourself to be relevant. So people have, their innovation engines have really cranked out amazing stuff, right? Just so that they can keep their businesses afloat. People have done a lot of interesting things, right? But at the end of this pandemic, we should just not leave that and just have to build it to the next level, right? I think if Indian companies can learn from it and really digitally re-engineer their business for the next 10, 15 years, there may or may not be a pandemic, but the digital re-engineering will really help them. It has shown that companies that are more digital natives are more likely to survive. So those are some of the things that I can immediately think of.
Okay. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. It was quite an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Sunil. Great to meet you.
Yeah.